Peter, in trying to assess, is there a God, what that God is like, and if that God is real, what that God would like for me, the process that we all go through, we start with the Bible, at least in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and then, based on my own experiences and interests, I have followed the development of key doctrines to the philosophy of religion, much of your work and your colleagues, which I find fascinating and totally absorbing. But then I have to stand back and say, as I watch these doctrines develop, and particularly in philosophy, but also in theology, they actually, as they develop, almost have no relationship to the original source in terms of any conversation having to refer back to it. So I just want to kind of look at the coherence of this picture that we draw from the Bible to theology, philosophy, and ask the fundamental question about the Bible itself. What's the relationship between the Bible and the kinds of philosophical questions that relate to the so-called doctrines that we find in the Bible?
Before I answer that question, I want to point out that I'm going to say something about how these questions and these doctrines are related to the Bible, but I want to emphasize that the Bible is far more important than those things. Those are epiphenomena almost. Those are things that arise out of the Bible. It's the Bible that plays the role in the life of the average Jew or Christian, and it's not the theology or the philosophy of religion, because most people don't ever encounter the philosophy or the theology. But on the assumption that philosophy of religion and theology are worth doing, the question is, from the Christian point of view, and I'll just speak from the Christian point of view, though I think most Jewish philosophers and theologians would agree with what I'm going to say, mutatis mutandis. The theology and philosophy are responsible to the Bible. It's sort of like physical science and the physical world. The physical world isn't sitting there with a set of statements that we can read off it. What we do is we develop theories that explain the phenomena of the physical world. But of course, the physical world is a lot more important than our theories about it, because the physical world is what we live in. And the theories are attempts to understand it. And we want everything in our philosophy and theology should be responsible to the Bible, and yet not something that you can just necessarily find in the Bible. Chesterton says somewhere that the New Testament is a riddle and the Nicene Creed is the answer. Well, maybe so. At any rate, that may or may not be true as a particular statement, but that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. The Bible is a riddle, and theology tries to answer the riddle. Where do we get these doctrines? Where do you get the doctrine, for example, that God is a necessary being?
Right.
It doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. And well, let's start at the beginning. Right? In almost all the myths of the pagan religions, whether they're Norse or Middle Eastern, these gods, they have, like any superhero, they have an origin story. Notice that Yahweh has no origin story. He's just there. And then he does things. But there is it's never raised. The question is never raised by any Jew anywhere, or for that matter, and then just why God is there. It's just an inescapable fact about reality that it contains a God. Whereas if things had gone differently, Zeus wouldn't have existed. You know, he's the child of Saturn and Earth or something, I forget. And the Norse and Babylonian myths, similarly, they tell contingent stories about how these things popped up, these gods popped up out of the world. There isn't any such story in the Bible. I think that's a tremendously significant fact. You might say that they represent God's existence as having no explanation. It doesn't contain the statement God's existence has no explanation, but in a way it's represented that way. So the Bible indicates things. And it's very rarely there are statements that, you'll find in Isaiah, for example, a statement that God created everything besides himself. We used to think that was contained in the first verse of the first chapter of Genesis. Now that translation is disputed somewhat, but you certainly do clearly find it other places in the Hebrew Bible. But it's quite rare to find explicit theological statements like even the goodness of God. God is considering destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, and he says, the question, shall not the judge of all the earth do what is right? Yeah, all right. So there you have God as a good and moral being, but these are explicit statements, are pretty rare, and the Bible is not there for the purpose of making explicit theological statements, and it gets supposed to tell a narrative. But we can look at the narrative, and we can do this thing called philosophy and theology on the basis of this narrative, but it's the narrative that's important.